The emergency lights cast eerie red shadows across Leon's quarters as he was jolted awake, his hand instinctively reaching for the plasma pistol under his pillow. Something had triggered the Astra's security systems again. Status, he growled, swinging his legs off the bed. Perimeter breach in Cargo Bay 3, the ship's AI responded in its usual monotone. Humanoid biosignature detected. Leon didn't waste time with a shirt as he pulled on his boots. The climate controls of his grounded starship kept the temperature perfect, even with the violent storms howling outside of Aridan. One affirmative. Female. Unusual biological readings. Unusual? Yeah, that's always a good sign, Leon muttered as he checked the plasma pistol's charge. After 5 years of hunting artifacts on this dying world, unusual was a synonym for trouble. His boots echoed against the cold metal corridors as he moved toward Cargo Bay 3. The red emergency lighting made the worn deck plates look like they were bleeding. His latest find, a rare energy core, sat secured in his private vault. If this was another attempt to steal it, there was going to be hell to pay. A shadow moved at the far end of the bay. Leon raised his weapon. Don't move. Hands where I can see them, a feminine voice called out, calm yet urgent. I mean no harm. The figure stepped into the dim light, and Leon's breath caught in his chest. She was tall, athletic, and stunning, her emerald green skin gleaming under the red lights. Her eyes were otherworldly, galaxies reflected in their depths. She wore a form-fitting bodysuit that left little to the imagination. I'm Kaelis, she said, raising one hand slowly. And I need your help. Leon kept his weapon aimed at her, despite her disarming smile. Breaking into my ship is a bold way to ask for help. I apologize for the intrusion, she said, stepping closer. Her movements were deliberate, graceful. But I had no choice. They're watching the main entrance. She hesitated, her gaze darkening. They want me dead. Leon studied her carefully. Her beauty was distracting, but years of dealing with con artists and thieves had taught him not to trust appearances. There was genuine fear behind her confident facade. Why me? He asked, lowering his weapon slightly. Because you're like me, she said, her voice faltering just a bit. An outsider. I need to perform a survival ritual with you. Leon couldn't help but laugh, shaking his head. That's a new one, he said. Look, if this is about the energy core, I don't care about artifacts. Kaelis took another step forward, her expression serious now. The ritual is real, she said urgently. Without it I'll die. And so will everyone else on this planet. We all might die. Leon arched an eyebrow. That's a hell of a pickup line. Kaelis' lips curved into a half-smile, but her eyes remained serious. I wish I were joking. The reality rift is growing stronger. I can feel it. She shuddered, hugging herself. And I can feel that you're different. Special? Leon holstered his weapon but kept his distance. Special how? Your energy signature, she said, tilting her head as she studied him. It's unlike anything I've ever encountered on this world. You've survived something impossible, haven't you? The scar on his chest throbbed at her words. He kept his face neutral, but his mind raced. Lady, everyone on Aridan has survived something impossible. It's practically a requirement for living here. A distant explosion rocked the ship, making them both stumble. Instinctively, Leon reached out to steady Kaelis. The moment their skin touched, an electric current surged through him. His enhanced reflexes, a souvenir from that impossible survival, suddenly felt sharper, more controlled. Kaelis gasped, her galaxy-like eyes widening. You felt that too? She whispered. Phoenix, status report, Leon called out, reluctantly pulling his hand away from hers. Multiple energy signatures approaching from the northwest. Weapons detected. Unknown technology. They found me, Kaelis whispered, her composure cracking. Please, we don't have much time. The ritual, it's supposed to save everyone. Leon rushed to a nearby console, pulling up the external cameras. Dark figures, cloaked by the perpetual dust storm outside, were advancing, carrying what looked like ancient technology merged with modern weapons. Want to tell me what's really going on? Leon asked, his tone sharp. The full truth would take too long, Kaelis said, stepping closer. Her presence made his skin tingle. And you probably wouldn't believe me anyway. But I swear, I'm not here to hurt you or steal from you. This ritual, it's not what you think. It's about connection. Energy transfer. Survival. Another explosion rattled the ship, and this time the shields flickered. They're using rift strike weapons, Kaelis said, her voice tight with dread. Ancient technology that can tear through any defense. Leon cursed under his breath. He'd heard rumors of rift strike tech, but never seen it in action. And these people hunting you want to either capture me or kill me, Kaelis added. I'm not sure which would be worse. She placed her hand on his bare chest, directly over his scar. The surge of energy that shot through him was immediate, intoxicating. Help me, Kaelis begged, her voice trembling. Please? Leon's mind raced, weighing his options with the precision of his enhanced reflexes. The beautiful stranger was dangerous, but so were the heavily armed hunters closing in on his ship. That surge of energy when they touched, it was impossible to ignore. Phoenix, initiate Defense Protocol Delta, Leon said, his voice cold. And give me a secure route to the panic room. Acknowledged, the AI responded. Southeast corridor remains clear. Kaelis' face lit up with relief, but Leon grabbed her wrist before she could move. This doesn't mean I trust you, he said, his voice low. But right now those guys out there are the bigger threat. Fair enough, Kaelis said, her fingers intertwining with his, sending another jolt through his system. Lead the way. They sprinted through the corridors, the ship's automated defenses kicking into gear. The sounds of plasma fire and explosions echoed through the halls. Leon led them through maintenance passages, taking a circuitous route to throw off any pursuers who might breach the ship. The panic room? Kaelis asked, breathless as they ran. Reinforced walls, independent life support, Leon replied, grinning. A few surprises I've collected. The clamor of plasma fire and distant explosions echoed down the narrow corridors of the Astra as Leon and Kaelis hurried through the maintenance tunnels. The ship's automated defenses had kicked in, but the blast shields wouldn't hold forever. They needed to get to the panic room and fast. Kaelis kept pace with him effortlessly, her long, lithe form cutting through the darkness. The emergency lighting illuminated her green skin, casting her in an otherworldly glow that made her look even more ethereal. How far? Kaelis asked between breaths, her voice strained but steady. Almost there, Leon said, glancing at the holographic map displayed on his wrist. The southeast corridor was clear, but that wouldn't last long. The rift strike weapons the hunters were using had already made a dent in the ship's outer armor. They were running out of time. He pushed open a small access door and led her into a larger maintenance shaft. The sound of their footsteps echoed as they descended further into the ship's bowels, where only the most vital systems were located. The deeper they went, the safer they'd be. A sudden shudder rumbled through the ship, making the walls tremble. Leon paused for a moment, his hand resting on the wall to steady himself. They're getting closer, Kaelis said, her voice a mix of determination and fear. Leon nodded, his jaw tight. He had to get her to the panic room. The longer she was exposed, the more likely it was that the hunters would catch up with them. He didn't know who these people were or what they wanted with Kaelis, but the desperation in her eyes, her plea for help, was enough to keep him from asking too many questions. Stay close, he warned, moving forward again. Kaelis didn't hesitate. Her sharp eyes scanned every shadow, every corner as they ran. He could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she flexed her fingers as though ready to defend herself at any moment. Her calm exterior was starting to crack. They reached the final junction, a thick, reinforced door blocking the entrance to the panic room. Leon swiped his wrist against the security panel, and the door hissed open with a soft, mechanical whir. Beyond it lay the small, self-contained room with a bed, a few storage units, and a secure communication terminal. It was as bare bones as it got, but it was one of the safest places on the ship. Inside, Leon said, pushing the door wider. Kaelis hesitated for a split second, her gaze flicking back toward the hall before stepping inside. Leon followed, securing the door behind them with a coded lock. He let out a deep breath, his pulse still racing. Now what? He asked, turning to face her. Kaelis paced the room, her fingers brushing over the various panels as though she were testing the air for something unseen. She stopped in the center of the room and turned to Leon, her eyes locking with his. The ritual, she said simply. Leon arched an eyebrow, crossing his arms. You're serious about this? Kaelis nodded. You don't understand. This isn't just some ancient ceremony. It's a survival mechanism, a bond between two people that connects them on an energy level. If I don't do it soon, I won't survive. The rift will tear me apart, and when it does, it will take everything with it. Leon studied her. Her words were heavy, but her eyes weren't begging. She didn't look like someone desperate for sympathy. So what, you need me to? He stopped himself before the words could fully form, unsure if he even wanted to know the specifics. I need your energy, Kaelis said, her voice firm. It's the only thing that can stabilize the rift's effects. Your signature is unique, unlike anything I've encountered on this planet. "And if I don't help you?" he asked, keeping his tone neutral. "Then I die," she said without flinching. "And everything we've been fighting for, all the sacrifices, will be in vain." Leon clenched his fists, his mind racing. The survival ritual was beginning to make more sense, at least on some level. She needed him, but he wasn't convinced he was ready to let down his guard entirely. Still, the danger was clear. The hunters outside, the rift's instability, it all pointed to one conclusion. This wasn't just about an alien artifact. "This is insane," he muttered, running a hand through his short-cropped hair. "But if it means saving this ship, and stopping those bastards out there from killing us both, then fine. But we do this my way." Kaelis met his eyes again. Her gaze softened for the first time, the tension between them easing just slightly. "Your way?" she asked, a hint of amusement in her voice. "Yeah," Leon said, "I'm not just going to lie down and do whatever ritual you're planning. We're going to make sure this works, and we're going to survive whatever comes next." Kaelis studied him for a long moment before nodding. "Agreed. But we need to start now." Leon wasn't entirely sure what starting now meant, but Kaelis had that look in her eyes. The same look he'd seen from survivors, people who knew that time wasn't a luxury. He stepped closer, his body tense but determined. "What do we do first?" She held out her hand. "Sit with me," she said softly. "We need to connect. Just trust me, Leon." He didn't move for a moment, uncertainty flickering in his chest. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. But the urgency in her voice, the impending threat outside, he couldn't deny it. Slowly he walked toward her, sitting cross-legged across from her. Kaelis mirrored his posture, her emerald skin shimmering in the dim light. She placed her hand on the ground between them, palm up, waiting. Leon exhaled slowly and placed his hand in hers. The moment they touched, a jolt of energy surged through him, stronger than anything he'd ever felt before. His enhanced reflexes, honed through years of survival on Aridan, kicked in instinctively. His senses sharpened, his mind clearing, as though every molecule of his being was suddenly more aware. But then something else happened. A flood of memories and images, a violent storm tearing through a desolate world, figures shrouded in mist and faces filled with fear. It was like his mind had opened to something far greater than himself. He could feel the tremors of the rift, the swirling force of cosmic energy threatening to tear everything apart. And in that moment he realized, Kaelis wasn't just asking for his help, she was offering him a chance to save both their lives. But it wasn't just survival on the line anymore. The future of everything hung in the balance. And Leon was beginning to understand just how deep this ritual really ran. "We're not alone," Kaelis whispered, her voice a soft echo in his mind. "The rift is everywhere. And it's only just begun." The energy between Leon and Kaelis crackled, their hands still locked, the current flowing between them. For a moment he felt like he was losing himself to it, like his consciousness was expanding and collapsing in on itself. The images that flooded his mind were overwhelming. A distant planet being torn apart by a cataclysmic force, the rift's power consuming everything in its wake. The air around them seemed to vibrate, humming with an ancient energy that called to him, pulling him deeper into something far larger than he ever could have imagined. "Focus, Leon," Kaelis' voice was like a tether, pulling him back to the present. "Focus on me." He blinked, breaking the trance. His chest was tight, and for a moment he thought he might suffocate from the weight of everything pressing in on him. But when he looked into Kaelis' eyes, those endless, star-filled eyes, he felt the chaos in his mind settle just a little. "I'm still here," he muttered, his voice rough. Kaelis gave him a small, reassuring smile. "Good. We need to stay connected. Just stay with me." Leon nodded, though every instinct in his body screamed to pull away. The energy flowing between them was intoxicating, disorienting. He had to admit, as much as he hated to admit it, he was beginning to feel it. A power he couldn't explain, a force that seemed to sync with his own pulse. "Tell me what to do," Leon said, his voice steadying despite the storm raging inside his mind. Kaelis hesitated, then slowly, deliberately she spoke. "Close your eyes. Breathe with me." He did as she asked, closing his eyes and taking a slow breath in. The sound of his own heartbeat pounded in his ears, and as he exhaled, he felt the pressure on his chest ease just a little. The room was silent except for the rhythmic hum of the Astra systems. "Now," she whispered, "picture the energy inside you, in your chest. The power that makes you different, that makes you special. Focus on it. Let it rise. Let it fill you." Leon obeyed, the sensation of his heart beating in his chest growing louder and stronger. The energy inside him, the one Kaelis had spoken of, seemed to respond to her words. It was like a dormant flame suddenly flaring to life. Let it expand. Let it connect with mine, Kaelis continued, her voice soft and steady, a guide through the strange territory. We're not just sharing power, Leon. We're sharing life. You need to feel what I feel, understand the weight of the rift. The moment Kaelis spoke the words, Leon felt the energy shift, like an invisible current that connected them both, drawing them together even more deeply. The room around him began to warp, the walls blurring in his peripheral vision. He couldn't tell where his energy stopped and hers began. Everything felt liquid, shifting and flowing like water in a storm. He gasped as the connection deepened. The images flooded his mind again, rivers of light, cracks in the fabric of reality itself. And then he saw it, the rift. It was like a gaping wound in the very fabric of space, a twisting, writhing mass of power that threatened to swallow everything whole. He could feel its pull, its hunger gnawing at the edges of his mind. Kaelis's words were still echoing in his head. Stay with me, Leon. Focus. He forced himself to stay grounded, using her voice like an anchor. He could feel her fear, the raw urgency in her energy. It was unlike anything he'd ever felt before. She wasn't just scared for herself, she was terrified for everything. And then he understood. Kaelis was fighting the rift. She was trying to contain it, hold it back, to keep it from consuming her, from consuming everything. Her energy was fighting against something far older, far more powerful than anything Leon had ever encountered. She wasn't just trying to survive, she was trying to save the entire planet. But she couldn't do it alone. His pulse quickened, the power inside him flaring. This was why she needed him. His energy was the missing piece, the one thing that could help her keep the rift at bay. It was the reason they were connected in the first place. The floor beneath him seemed to ripple, as if reality itself was bending under the strain of the energy they were channeling. Leon's mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was feeling, trying to hold on to Kaelis's presence. It was like he was standing at the center of the storm, and if he let go for even a second, he'd be consumed by it. You're doing well, Kaelis's voice came again, but this time it was distant, muffled. But we need more. I need you to trust me, Leon. His brow furrowed in confusion. Trust her? After everything? She was asking him to do something beyond his understanding, to let go of every instinct that had kept him alive on this hostile world. But in her eyes there was no deceit, no lies. There was only the truth, the raw, terrible truth of the rift and the destruction it would bring. He swallowed hard. All right, he said through clenched teeth. Tell me what to do. Let go of your fear. Let go of the pain. It's all connected to the rift. The energy inside you, it's the key. You need to give it to me. Leon's stomach churned at the thought. His energy was the only thing he had left. It was the only thing that had kept him alive when everything else seemed to fall apart. The thought of giving it away, of losing it, felt like a death sentence. But Kaelis's face was etched with desperation now. The fear was raw, unfiltered. It wasn't just about her. It wasn't just about saving herself. She was trying to save him too. He closed his eyes, drawing in a deep breath. Okay, he muttered, barely above a whisper. Here, take it. Kaelis's hand, still gripping his, trembled slightly. I need all of it, she said, her voice nearly a whisper now. All of you. And then just like that, Leon felt the pull. The energy surged from his chest, his soul, as though something inside him snapped free. It was as if he were giving up a part of himself, something that made him who he was. The power flowed through his veins, through the connection between them, and he felt it, Kaelis pulling it into herself, merging it with hers. The world around him began to distort again, and this time, it wasn't just his mind that felt like it was breaking. His body, his very sense of self, was starting to blur with hers. A sudden pulse of pain exploded in his chest, like something tearing through his ribs. He gasped, unable to breathe for a moment. But then, just as suddenly, the pain faded, replaced by something else, something greater, something stronger. The rift. The energy of the rift was receding. For a brief moment, it was like the world was holding its breath, the violence and chaos of the storm around them stilling as if the storm itself feared what they were doing. Leon opened his eyes. Kaelis's face was pale, her lips parted as she drew in a shuddering breath. She looked almost ethereal, like something ancient, something other, but at the same time she seemed more human than ever. It's working, she whispered, her voice shaking. It's working. Leon could feel it too. The weight on his chest, the crushing pressure of the rift's influence, was gone. He felt lighter, freer. But the storm wasn't over. It was just beginning. Leon's pulse was still racing, the power coursing through his veins like wildfire. But now it was different, controlled. The connection between him and Kaelis had shifted. No longer was it a desperate, chaotic surge of energy, it was a steady flow, an alignment between their hearts, their minds, their souls. She had taken what he'd given her, and in return, he felt a strange sense of balance. The pain had subsided, but it had left something else behind, a lingering tension, an undeniable weight. Kaelis stood before him, her emerald skin shimmering in the dim light of the panic room. Her eyes were closed, her breathing slow but deep, like someone who had just come out of an intense, mind-shattering experience. She exhaled sharply and opened her eyes, locking gazes with him. "It's done," she whispered. Leon felt a shiver crawl down his spine, but this time, it wasn't from fear. It was a sense of something profound having just passed between them. The feeling of being connected, not just by the ritual but by something deeper. "Is it really over?" Leon asked, his voice hoarse. He tried to make sense of everything that had just happened. The rift had stopped pulsing against him, but he knew it wasn't gone. It was still out there. It had to be. Kaelis stepped closer, and for a moment, her hand hovered near his chest before resting gently on his shoulder. Her touch was warm, almost electric, but it was comforting, not threatening. "It's not over, Leon," she said softly. "But we've delayed it just for now. The rift is still there waiting. And those who want me, they'll come for us." The gravity of her words hit him again. The danger wasn't over. In fact, it was only beginning. Leon glanced at the console in the corner of the room. The ship's defense systems were still active, but the strain was beginning to show. The hull was cracked in places, and he could hear the faint hum of the ship's systems struggling to hold everything together. Outside, the dust storm raged, but the real threat was not the storm, it was the hunters, the ones tracking Kaelis. "Who are they, Kaelis?" Leon asked, his voice hardening. "The ones chasing you. What do they want?" Kaelis didn't answer immediately. She turned away, pacing the small room. Leon watched her closely, the way her posture seemed to tighten with every step. The calm and collected exterior she'd maintained was beginning to crack. She was scared, and for the first time he could see it. "They're called the Echelon," she finally said, her voice cold. "A faction of power-hungry zealots. They've been hunting me for years. They believe I hold the key to controlling the rift, that I can use it to reshape the universe. But they don't understand what the rift truly is. They don't care about the cost." She stopped in front of him, her eyes burning with intensity. "They think I'm the key to survival, but they're wrong. They will destroy everything if they get their hands on me." Leon clenched his jaw. He could see the desperation in her eyes. He could feel it in his bones. The Echelon weren't just after Kaelis, they were after everything. If they could control the rift, there would be no end to the destruction they could bring. "And what do you mean when you say you're the key?" Leon asked, his mind racing. "What do they think you can do?" Kaelis inhaled sharply, her eyes flicking away from his. "The ritual we just performed, it's only one part of it. There's something inside me, something linked to the rift. I don't understand it completely, but it's like the energy that sustains me. If they force me to open it, to unleash it fully, they could harness the rift's power. But it won't end with them. It will destroy everything. The planet, the people, the universe." A cold shiver ran through him. "You're telling me they want to weaponize the rift?" Kaelis nodded grimly. "And if they succeed, it won't just be Aridan that suffers. They'll tear through space, through time. The universe itself will unravel." Leon's stomach twisted at the thought. The sheer scale of what she was describing was impossible to comprehend. No one had the power to destroy everything, except the rift. It was the only force that could truly bring an end to it all. He turned away from her, his mind spinning. The Astra had only so many defenses left. He could hear the low hum of plasma turrets engaging, the heavy footfalls of the hunters approaching, but they wouldn't be enough. Not against the technology the Echelon wielded. They were coming for them, and the ship's shields were already at critical levels. "Then what do we do now?" Leon asked, his voice filled with frustration. "We can't just sit here and wait for them to break down the door. You said you're the key, then we need to figure out how to stop them. How to use the rift against them." Kaelis stood silently for a moment, and then she nodded slowly as though coming to some decision. "I need to take you to the vault. The real vault. Not the one you have your artifacts in." Leon blinked, confusion swirling inside him. "The vault? I thought you said the core was in there?" "Not the energy core. Not the artifact you're protecting," Kaelis said, shaking her head. "The vault is a place of knowledge, hidden from the Echelon. It's where I first learned the truth about the rift, about what's inside me." Leon's eyes narrowed. "You've been hiding something from me?" She sighed, rubbing her temples. "I didn't have a choice. If they knew the full truth, they would have killed me long before I made it here. But now, We don't have a choice. The Echelon will find us eventually. And when they do, we need to be prepared. Leon didn't say anything for a moment. His heart was still hammering in his chest, the weight of what was at stake crashing down on him. He didn't know whether he could trust her fully. He didn't know if he was making a mistake. But one thing was certain. Staying here wasn't an option. They had to keep moving, keep fighting. All right, Leon said, his voice low and determined. Lead the way. Kaelis looked at him, her expression softening just a little. You're sure about this? Leon nodded. I don't have time to question things anymore. We either stop them or we all die. With that, Kaelis turned toward the door, leading him out of the panic room and into the labyrinthine corridors of the Astra. The ship groaned under the strain of battle, but for now it was still moving. And as long as it was moving, they had a chance. They weren't alone in the fight. And for the first time in a long time, Leon felt the weight of the rift pressing against him, but he wasn't afraid anymore. They'd survived this far, together. And that was enough to push forward. For now. The Astra shuddered beneath their feet as Kaelis and Leon moved swiftly through the ship's corridors. The flashing red emergency lights cast long, jagged shadows across the metal walls. Outside, the dust storm raged on, but it was nothing compared to the storm closing in on them from within. Leon's mind raced as they moved through the ship's narrow halls. His pulse pounded in his ears, a drumbeat to the chaos they were about to face. Kaelis had said they had no time to waste, and he believed her. Every step they took felt heavier, the tension in the air palpable. The Echelon were out there. They were coming for her. And if they were lucky, they'd make it to the vault before the ship was overrun. Kaelis led the way, her long legs moving with practiced speed. Her eyes remained fixed ahead, but Leon could feel the strain in her body, the subtle tremors in her movements. Despite her calm exterior, he knew she was barely holding it together. She was scared. And that fear, that raw emotion, was something he understood all too well. Are we close? Leon asked, keeping his voice low. We should be, Kaelis replied, her voice clipped. Just another few corridors? As if on cue, the hum of the ship's defenses flared to life. The faint crackle of energy sounded overhead, followed by the deep rumble of plasma turrets engaging. Leon cursed under his breath. They're here, he muttered, his hand instinctively reaching for his sidearm, though he knew it wouldn't be enough. The Echelon had weapons that could tear through the Astra's reinforced hull. The turrets were useless against them. Kaelis shot him a sharp glance, her eyes wide. We need to move now. The urgency in her voice was enough to push Leon into action. They ran, their footsteps echoing off the metal floor as the ship's corridors seemed to narrow, the walls pressing in on them. The vault wasn't far. He could feel it in his gut. But with every step, he felt the weight of the situation sink deeper into his bones. If they didn't make it to the vault, they'd be sitting ducks. And if they didn't figure out how to stop the Echelon, the ship and everything they had fought for would be dust. Another explosion rattled the Astra, this time closer, and Leon stumbled, nearly losing his footing. Kaelis reached out to steady him, but he pulled away quickly, more focused on the task ahead. The vault. They had to get there. They rounded a corner, and Kaelis stopped abruptly in front of a heavy, reinforced door. It was different from the rest of the ship's access points. Sleek, polished, and unmistakably alien. Kaelis's fingers moved swiftly over the glowing panel beside it, her touch precise and urgent. The door's surface hummed as the lock disengaged, and with a deep, resonant hiss, it slid open. Kaelis didn't hesitate. She stepped through the threshold, and Leon followed her into the cool, dimly lit chamber. The vault was unlike anything he had ever seen. Ancient, yes, but it was also profoundly alive. There were no dusty relics here. No artifacts. Instead, the room was filled with a glowing, pulsating energy that seemed to breathe with life. A deep, rhythmic hum resonated through the walls, filling the space with an otherworldly presence. Kaelis moved toward the center of the room, where an enormous, crystalline structure rose from the floor. Its jagged surface seemed to shift and shimmer, as though the very air around it bent to its will. Leon felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. This is it, Kaelis said softly, her voice full of awe. The core of the rift. Leon stepped closer, his breath catching in his throat. The structure wasn't just a physical object. It was a conduit, an anchor to something far more ancient and powerful than anything he had ever encountered. The rift wasn't just a force. It was alive. What do we do now? Leon asked, his voice tight with uncertainty. Kaelis turned to face him, her emerald eyes flickering with something like resolve. We need to unlock it. We need to use it to stabilize the rift. But there's a price. Leon raised an eyebrow. A price? She nodded. The energy it takes to control the rift is immense. We'll take everything we have. All of it. A loud bang sounded from the far end of the corridor outside. The Echelon were here. We don't have time, Kaelis said, stepping closer to the crystalline structure. It has to be now. Leon's heart hammered in his chest. The realization hit him like a tidal wave. She was asking him to give everything, everything he had, everything he was. To use the very thing inside him that had kept him alive all these years, the energy he had fought to control, to harness, to own. But if they didn't, the Echelon would succeed. And that meant the end of everything. The end of them. I'm in, Leon said, his voice steady, though his insides were twisted with doubt. Let's do it. Kaelis gave him a small, fleeting smile. She was already moving toward the structure, placing her palms against its surface. The energy pulsed, resonating beneath her hands. The glow grew brighter, more intense, as though it were awakening in response to her touch. Leon stepped forward, his breath shallow. His hand reached out toward Kaelis's, and as soon as his skin made contact with hers, the surge of power between them was like nothing he had ever felt before. It was as if their souls merged, their energy flowing into the heart of the rift. The chamber around them seemed to dissolve into light, the edges of reality blurring as the full force of the rift's power wrapped around them. The pain was excruciating. But it wasn't just physical. It was like every cell in his body was screaming, every memory, every fear, every part of him pulling apart and rebuilding in an instant. The energy surged, flooding through him and into Kaelis, through her and into the rift. Time lost meaning. Everything became a whirl of light and sound, of fractured visions and endless possibilities. Then suddenly it all stopped. Leon gasped for air, his body trembling. The energy still hummed in his veins, but it wasn't the same frantic pulse. It was steady, contained. The rift, the chaotic, destructive force that had been threatening to tear the universe apart, was no longer a threat. It was sealed, its power held at bay. Kaelis collapsed to her knees, her breath ragged. Her skin was pale, her body trembling from the immense toll the ritual had taken on her. Leon dropped to his knees beside her, his hand reaching out to steady her. It's done, she whispered, her voice barely audible. We did it. Leon's chest heaved with exhaustion, but a strange sense of relief washed over him. They had won. Against all odds they had stopped the Echelon, and they had sealed the rift. But as he looked into Kaelis' eyes, he knew this wasn't the end. There would be more to face, more battles to fight. The Echelon would return and other threats would rise. But for now they had survived. Together. And that, Leon realized, was enough. He reached down, brushing a lock of hair from her face, his thumb gently caressing her cheek. We're not alone in this anymore, he said softly. We're in this together. Kaelis smiled, her exhaustion fading into something softer, something warmer. We are, she whispered. And as they sat there, in the heart of the vault, the storm outside seemed a little less fierce, the universe just a little more bearable. For now, at least,